Sarah Martinez looked like any other mom dropping her 8-year-old daughter Emma off at summer camp that Tuesday morning. She wore simple jeans, sneakers, and a navy blue t-shirt, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Most people who saw her would never guess that just 5 years earlier, she had been one of the first women to complete Navy SEAL training. The decision to leave the military hadn't been easy. After serving 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq, Sarah wanted a different life when she met David, a kind-hearted teacher who knew nothing about her past beyond "I served in the Navy." They married, had Emma, and built a quiet life in the small mountain town of Pine Ridge, Colorado. Sarah now worked as a freelance security consultant, mostly doing boring risk assessments for local businesses. She preferred it that way. "Mom, you're spacing out again," Emma said from the passenger seat, adjusting her purple backpack. Sarah smiled and focused on the winding mountain road ahead. "Sorry, kiddo, just thinking about work." "Is your work dangerous?" Emma asked, the same question she'd been asking lately. "Not anymore, sweetheart. I mostly sit at a computer now." It wasn't entirely true. Last month, Sarah had quietly helped the local police department plan a raid on a drug house. But Emma didn't need to know about that. The whole point of leaving her old life behind was to give her daughter stability and safety. They pulled into the parking lot of Camp Wildwood, a summer day camp nestled in a valley surrounded by pine trees. Emma had been going here for 3 weeks and loved every minute of it. The camp specialized in outdoor activities like hiking, rock climbing, and wilderness survival skills, something that secretly pleased Sarah's tactical mind. "Have a great day, Em. I'll pick you up at 4, Sarah said, giving her daughter a hug. "Love you, Mom." Sarah watched Emma run toward the main building where other kids were gathering. The camp director, Mrs. Rodriguez, waved from the porch. Everything looked normal and peaceful. As Sarah drove back toward town, she noticed a black SUV in her rearview mirror. It had been behind her since she left home, but she hadn't thought much of it until now. In Pine Ridge, you saw the same vehicles constantly. But when she turned left toward the grocery store and the SUV followed, her old training kicked in. Sarah made 2 more unnecessary turns. The SUV stayed behind her. Her phone buzzed with a text message. While stopped at a red light, she glanced at it. "We need to talk. Coffee shop on Main Street. Come alone." The message came from an unknown number. Sarah's jaw tightened. This felt like her old life trying to drag her back in. She drove to the coffee shop, but parked across the street where she could observe the entrance. Through her side mirror, she watched the black SUV park 2 blocks away. 2 men in dark suits got out and walked casually toward the coffee shop. Sarah recognized the type immediately: government agents. But which agency? And what did they want with a former SEAL who had been living quietly in Colorado for 5 years? She waited 10 minutes before entering the coffee shop. It was nearly empty except for an elderly man reading a newspaper and a woman typing on her laptop. The 2 suits sat at a corner table, trying to look casual but failing miserably. Sarah ordered a black coffee and chose a table where she could see all the exits. One of the agents, a tall man with graying hair, approached her table. "Mrs. Martinez? I'm Agent Collins with the Department of Defense. This is Agent Park." He gestured to his Asian American partner. "We'd like to speak with you about a matter of national security." "I think you have the wrong person," Sarah said calmly, sipping her coffee. "I'm just a security consultant." "Former Petty Officer First Class Sarah Chen, now Sarah Martinez," Collins said quietly. 3 tours overseas, specialized in reconnaissance and direct action. You left the Navy 5 years ago under honorable circumstances. Sarah's grip on her coffee cup tightened slightly. "What do you want?" Agent Park leaned forward. "A situation has developed that requires your specific skill set. We know you've been trying to live a normal life, and we respect that, but lives are at stake." "I'm retired," Sarah said firmly. "I have a family now." "We understand," Collins said. but you're the only person within 500 miles with the necessary experience for what we're dealing with. Sarah stood up. I'm not interested. Find someone else. As she walked toward the door, Collins called out quietly, It involves Camp Wildwood. Sarah stopped. Her blood turned cold. She slowly turned around and walked back to the table. Explain. Now. Park slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a satellite image of Camp Wildwood, but something was wrong. Several black vehicles surrounded the property, and Sarah could see figures with weapons positioned around the perimeter. This was taken an hour ago, Collins said. A domestic terrorist group calling themselves the Mountain Liberation Front has taken the camp. 62 children and 8 staff members are being held hostage. Sarah stared at the image, her mind racing. What do they want? They're demanding the release of their leader, Marcus Webb, who's currently in federal prison for bombing a government building in Denver 2 years ago. They've given the FBI 24 hours to comply or they start executing hostages. The FBI has negotiators. They have a hostage rescue team. Why do you need me? Collins pulled up another image on the tablet. Because of this. The screen showed a detailed layout of the camp's buildings and surrounding terrain. Red X marks indicated the positions of armed sentries. Numbers beside each position showed estimated ranges and fields of fire. They're not amateurs, Park explained. This is a highly coordinated operation. They've positioned themselves to cover every possible approach route. Traditional law enforcement tactics won't work without significant casualties. The terrain around Camp Wildwood is extremely challenging, Collins continued. Dense forest, steep ravines, multiple elevation changes. A frontal assault would be suicide. We need someone who can get in undetected and assess the situation from the inside. Sarah studied the layout, her tactical mind automatically analyzing angles of approach and potential weak points. How many hostiles? We estimate 12 to 15 armed individuals. They have military-grade weapons and appear to have had professional training. Former military? Some of them, yes. Webb recruited several discharged soldiers with grievances against the government. Sarah looked at the image again, thinking about Emma sitting in that building surrounded by men with guns. What about the local authorities? Sheriff's Department is handling perimeter security, but they're out of their depth. The FBI's Critical Incident Response Group is en route, but they won't arrive for another 4 hours. By then it might be too late, Sarah finished. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them, her expression had changed. The suburban mom was gone, replaced by something harder and more focused. What do you know about the interior layout of the buildings? Collins smiled slightly. We were hoping you'd ask that. For the next hour, they went over every detail. The camp's main building housed the dining hall and recreation room where most of the hostages were being held. The terrorists had positioned sentries in the surrounding cabins and along the main access road. They had also disabled all cell phone service in the area and cut the landline connections. They're communicating with each other using short-range radios, Park explained. We're monitoring their frequency, but they're using basic code words. What about weapons? AR-15 rifles, handguns, and what appears to be at least 2 shotguns. They also have what looks like explosive devices, though we can't confirm if they're real or fake. Sarah nodded grimly. Even fake explosives would be effective psychological weapons against children. I'll need equipment, she said finally. Already arranged, Collins replied. There's a van parked behind the hardware store. Everything you'll need is inside. And after I get inside, what's the extraction plan? That depends on what you find. Primary objective is intelligence gathering. Secondary is neutralizing the threat if the opportunity presents itself. Sarah stood up again. I want real-time communication with whoever's running the operation. You'll have it. And I want a guarantee that if something happens to me, my daughter will be protected. Both agents nodded solemnly. "You have our word," Collins said. Sarah walked out of the coffee shop with a strange mix of dread and familiarity washing over her. She had hoped never to feel this way again, the cold, focused clarity that came before a dangerous mission. But Emma was in that building, along with dozens of other innocent children. The van behind the hardware store was exactly where Collins had said it would be. Inside, Sarah found tactical gear that brought back a flood of memories: night vision goggles, communications equipment, a suppressed pistol, and various other tools she hadn't used in years. As she changed clothes, Sarah allowed herself one moment of doubt. She was 32 years old, hadn't seen combat in 5 years, and was about to go up against multiple armed terrorists on her own. In her previous life, she would have had a team of highly trained operators backing her up. But then she thought about Emma's laugh that morning, about all the other children who were probably terrified and confused. She thought about their parents, who had dropped them off expecting a normal day of summer camp activities. Sarah finished gearing up and checked her equipment one final time. She clipped the communications device to her ear and spoke quietly. "Control, this is Ghost. Radio check. Ghost, this is Control. We read you 5 by 5. The old call sign felt strange on her lips after so many years. During her Navy career, she had earned the nickname for her ability to move unseen through enemy territory. "Control, I'm moving to the target area. ETA 15 minutes. Copy, Ghost. FBI team is still 3 hours out. You are cleared to proceed with reconnaissance mission." Sarah started the van and drove toward the mountains, toward Camp Wildwood, toward a confrontation she had hoped never to face again. But as the familiar weight of tactical gear settled on her shoulders and her mind shifted into combat mode, she realized something important. Despite 5 years of trying to be someone else, this was still who she was. The road to Camp Wildwood wound through increasingly dense forest. Sarah parked the van 2 miles from the camp, in a spot where it wouldn't be visible from the road. From here, she would have to go on foot through terrain she knew well from hiking with Emma on weekends. She strapped on her gear and began moving through the trees, every sense alert. The forest was eerily quiet. No birds singing, no small animals rustling in the underbrush. Even nature seemed to sense that something was wrong. As Sarah got closer to the camp, she could hear distant voices carrying through the trees, male voices, harsh and commanding. The sound made her jaw clench with anger. Through her earpiece, Control's voice was calm and professional. "Ghost, satellite shows no movement on the perimeter. Hostiles appear to be maintaining static positions. Copy, Control, beginning final approach." Sarah reached the edge of the tree line and lay flat on her stomach, using binoculars to survey the camp. The main building was about 200 meters away across an open field. She could see armed men positioned exactly where the satellite images had indicated. But what the satellite hadn't shown was the fear on the face of a camp counselor visible through one of the windows, or the way the armed sentries were constantly moving, nervous energy making them unpredictable. "Control, I have visual confirmation of hostiles, counting at least 6 armed individuals in view. They appear agitated." "Copy, Ghost. What's your assessment?" Sarah studied the scene for several more minutes, her mind automatically calculating distances, cover positions, and potential courses of action. "Control! These guys are amateurs trying to act professional. Their positioning is textbook, but they're bunched up and nervous. Classic overconfidence mixed with fear." "Understood. Can you get closer?" Sarah was already planning her route. A dry creek bed ran along the eastern side of the camp, providing cover for about half the distance to the main building. From there, she would have to cross open ground, but there was a maintenance shed that could provide concealment. "Moving to secondary position," she whispered into her microphone. As Sarah began her approach through the creek bed, she thought about Emma and all the other children inside that building. She thought about their parents, probably gathered somewhere nearby, desperate for news, and she thought about the promise she had made to herself 5 years ago, that she was done being a weapon, done putting herself in harm's way. But sometimes, life didn't give you choices. Sometimes the person you used to be was exactly the person who was needed. Sarah moved through the dry creek bed like a shadow, each step calculated and silent. Years of civilian life hadn't dulled her tactical instincts. If anything, the stakes felt higher now than they ever had in Afghanistan. This wasn't about completing a mission or serving her country. This was about saving her daughter. The creek bed provided excellent cover for the first 100 meters. Sarah stayed low, using the natural curves and overhanging brush to remain invisible from the camp above. Through her earpiece, she could hear Control coordinating with local law enforcement to establish a wider perimeter. "Ghost, we're getting reports that the terrorists have made contact with media outlets," Control's voice whispered in her ear. "They're planning to go public with their demands in 2 hours. Copy, that changes the timeline." Sarah knew what going public meant. Once news crews arrived and the story went national, everything would become more complicated. The terrorists would feel pressure to prove they were serious about their threats. Children could die for the sake of dramatic television footage. She reached the end of the creek bed and carefully raised her head to survey the final approach. The maintenance shed was 40 meters away across open ground. Between her position and the shed, there was nothing but short grass and scattered rocks, no cover at all. Worse, one of the armed sentries was positioned on the roof of a nearby cabin, giving him a clear view of the entire area. Sarah watched him for several minutes, timing his movement pattern. He was scanning left to right in a regular rhythm, pausing to look toward the road, then repeating the cycle. Professional behavior, but predictable. "Control, I need a distraction on the west side of the camp. Something to draw attention away from my position." "Stand by, Ghost." 2 minutes later, Sarah heard the distant sound of a vehicle engine revving loudly from the direction of the main road. The sentry on the roof immediately turned toward the sound, speaking rapidly into his radio. Sarah sprinted across the open ground, her body automatically falling into the low, efficient run she had learned in SEAL training. 40 meters felt like 400, but she reached the maintenance shed without being spotted. She pressed her back against the metal wall, breathing steadily to control her adrenaline. The shed smelled of gasoline and cut grass, normal summer camp maintenance equipment. Through a dirty window, she could see the main building where the hostages were being held. "Ghost in position," she whispered. "Copy. What do you see?" Sarah peered carefully around the corner of the shed. The main building's windows had been covered with what looked like newspaper and duct tape, but she could make out shapes moving inside. 2 armed men stood guard at the front entrance, while another patrolled the wraparound porch. At least 3 hostiles visible on the main building. Interior windows are blocked. No clear visual on hostages. Understood. FBI negotiator has established contact with the group leader. He's identified himself as Thomas Cray, Webb's second-in-command. Sarah filed away the name. In her previous life, she would have had detailed intelligence on every known associate of Marcus Webb. Now she was going in blind. She studied the building's construction, looking for potential entry points. Camp Wildwood's main lodge was typical mountain architecture. Heavy timber frame with large windows and multiple doors. During her visits with Emma, Sarah had noticed that the building had a basement level used for storage and equipment. "Control, is there a basement access to the main building?" Checking with camp management, "Yes. There's an external entrance on the north side of the building. Steel doors that lead to the maintenance area." "Copy. Moving to reconnaissance position." Sarah crept around the maintenance shed, staying in the shadows cast by nearby pine trees. The basement entrance was exactly where Control had said it would be. A pair of angled steel doors that led underground. But as she got closer, Sarah realized the doors were chained shut from the outside. The terrorists had thought of potential entry points and secured them. Control. Basement access is compromised. They've chained it shut. Copy, Ghost. What's your assessment for alternative entry? Sarah studied the building for several more minutes. The roof had skylights that might provide access, but getting up there would require climbing the exterior wall in full view of the sentries. The upper floor windows were all covered and likely guarded from inside. Limited options, she reported. Target is well secured. As she spoke, Sarah heard a new sound that made her blood run cold. A child crying. The sound was faint but unmistakable, coming from inside the main building. Control. I can hear distressed children inside. Recommend we expedite timeline. Negative, Ghost. FBI negotiator reports the situation is stable. Continue reconnaissance only. Sarah gritted her teeth. Stable from whose perspective? She thought about Emma, who was probably terrified and confused, wondering why men with guns were keeping her away from her mother. Ghost. Be advised we're tracking increased radio chatter between the hostiles. Something has them agitated. Before Sarah could respond, she heard heavy footsteps approaching her position. Someone was walking around the maintenance shed from the opposite direction. Sarah quickly but quietly moved to the back corner of the building, pressing herself flat against the wall. Told you to check all the outbuildings every hour, a harsh male voice was saying. I checked them 2 hours ago. Nobody's out here, another voice replied, sounding younger and less confident. Check them again. Cray thinks someone might be trying to sneak up on us. Sarah's mind raced. They were doing security sweeps of the perimeter buildings. In about 30 seconds, one of the terrorists was going to walk around the corner and find her crouched behind the shed. She had two choices: retreat back toward the tree line and abandon her mission, or neutralize the threat and continue forward. Retreat meant leaving Emma and the other children with no help for at least 3 more hours until the FBI team arrived. The footsteps were getting closer. Sarah quietly drew her suppressed pistol and took a deep breath. She hadn't killed anyone in 5 years. Hadn't even pointed a gun at another human being since leaving the Navy. But some skills, once learned, never really go away. I'm telling you, there's nobody out here, the younger voice said, now very close to Sarah's position. Just do what you're told, Jake. Cray's already pissed about the media calling. We don't need to give him another reason to... A figure in camouflage clothing rounded the corner of the shed. He was young, maybe early 20s, carrying an AR-15 rifle across his chest. His eyes went wide when he saw Sarah crouched against the wall. For a split second, they stared at each other. Sarah could see that he was scared, probably in over his head, but she could also see his finger moving toward the trigger of his rifle. Don't, Sarah said quietly, her pistol trained on his center mass. The young man froze. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Jake? The other voice called from around the front of the shed. What's taking so long? Sarah gestured for the young terrorist to remain silent, but she could see panic building in his eyes. He was going to call out to his partner. There's someone here, Jake yelled, swinging his rifle toward Sarah. Sarah moved faster than he could track, years of combat training taking over. She struck Jake's rifle with her left hand while simultaneously stepping into his personal space. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the ground as she drove her knee into his solar plexus. Jake collapsed, gasping for air. Sarah caught his rifle as it fell and heard heavy footsteps running around the shed. Jake! What the hell? The second terrorist appeared, a bearded man in his 30s carrying a shotgun. He saw Sarah holding Jake's rifle and immediately raised his weapon. Drop it! Drop it now! Sarah found herself looking down the barrel of a 12-gauge shotgun held by a man whose hands were shaking with adrenaline. Behind him, she could hear more voices shouting, other terrorists responding to the gunshot. I said drop the weapon, the bearded man yelled. Sarah calculated her options. She could probably take him. She was faster and better trained than these militia wannabes. But the noise had already attracted attention, and she could hear at least 3 more people running toward the maintenance shed. She lowered the rifle and let it drop to the ground. "Hands where I can see them!" Sarah raised her hands, but her mind was still working, still planning. The bearded man stepped closer, keeping his shotgun trained on her chest. "Who the hell are you? FBI?" Before Sarah could answer, 3 more armed men appeared around the corner of the shed. One of them, a tall man with military-style short hair, seemed to be in charge. "What's the situation, Murphy?" he barked. "Found her sneaking around behind the maintenance shed. Jake here walked right into her." The leader looked Sarah up and down, taking in her tactical gear and equipment. "Federal agent?" "No," Sarah said calmly. "Police?" "No." The leader stepped closer, his rifle pointed at Sarah's face. "Then what are you? Some kind of special forces wannabe playing hero?" Sarah met his eyes steadily. "I'm a mother." The man laughed. Murphy, the bearded one with the shotgun, shook his head. "A mother? Lady, you picked the wrong day to play soldier?" "My daughter is in that building," Sarah said, nodding toward the main lodge. The laughter stopped. The leader studied her face more carefully. "What's your name?" "Sarah Martinez." "Well, Sarah Martinez, you just made a very big mistake. Cray is going to want to talk to you." They zip-tied Sarah's hands behind her back and searched her equipment. They found her pistol, her communications gear, and the night vision goggles. "This is military-grade hardware," one of them observed. "She's not just some soccer mom." "Doesn't matter," the leader said. "She's leverage now." As they marched her toward the main building, Sarah tried to remember everything she could about domestic terrorist psychology. These men were true believers, convinced that the government had wronged them somehow. That made them dangerous because they weren't thinking rationally, but it also made them predictable. The front door of the main lodge opened as they approached. Sarah could see into the large recreation room where most of the hostages were being held. Children sitting on the floor in groups, some crying, some staring blankly at the walls. Camp counselors trying to keep them calm while armed men paced around the perimeter. Sarah spotted Emma immediately. Her daughter was sitting with a group of kids near the fireplace, her purple backpack clutched in her lap. She looked scared but unharmed. "Emma!" Sarah called out instinctively. Emma's head snapped up. When she saw her mother, her face lit up with relief and confusion. "Mom?" "It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay." A new voice cut through the room, cold and commanding. "Bring her here." Sarah was pushed forward toward a man standing near the camp director's desk. He was in his 40s, completely bald, with the kind of lean, hard build that suggested military training. This had to be Thomas Cray. "So you're the mother," Cray said, looking Sarah up and down. "The mother who thinks she can take on trained soldiers with a pistol and some night vision goggles." "I just wanted to see if my daughter was safe," Sarah said. "Your daughter is perfectly safe. As long as the government meets our demands, all these children will go home to their families." Cray walked around Sarah in a slow circle, like a predator examining prey. "But you're different. You're not some hysterical parent trying to rush the building. You had professional equipment. You knew how to move quietly. You had a plan." Sarah remained silent. "Military training?" Cray continued. "Law enforcement? Private security?" Still, Sarah said nothing. Cray stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell coffee on his breath. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here now, and your presence changes things." He gestured to one of his men. "Get the camera ready. We're going to send the FBI a message about what happens when they try to sneak people in here." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever Cray was planning, it wasn't going to end well for her or the children. "Mr. Cray," she said quietly. He looked surprised that she knew his name. "You seem like an intelligent man, a man with military experience. You know that killing hostages will only make things worse for you." Cray laughed bitterly. "Worse? Lady, they already have us labeled as terrorists. They already want to lock us up forever." "What's worse than that?" "Dead," Sarah said simply. The room went quiet. Even the children seemed to sense the tension. Cray's eyes narrowed. "You think you're pretty smart, don't you? Coming in here with your special ops gear, thinking you can negotiate with us." "I think you're making a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" Sarah looked around the room, at the scared children and nervous terrorists. "You're assuming I came alone." Cray studied her face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" For a moment, uncertainty flickered in Cray's eyes. Then he shook his head and gestured to Murphy. "Put her on her knees." Murphy shoved Sarah down onto the floor. Cray drew a pistol from his holster and pointed it at her head. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," he said, "but it ends now." Sarah looked up at him calmly, her mind calculating distances and reaction times. Cray was standing too close, his weapon within reach if she moved fast enough. Murphy was to her left, focused on keeping his shotgun trained on her. The other terrorists were spread around the room, but most of them were watching the children rather than her. "Last chance," Cray said. "Are you FBI, CIA, military?" Sarah met his eyes. "I used to be." "Used to be what?" And then, with perfect calmness, Sarah told him exactly what she used to be. "I used to be someone you should have been a lot more careful about capturing." Cray's finger tightened on the trigger. "What the hell does that mean?" Sarah smiled, and for the first time since entering the building, she looked truly dangerous. "It means you just pointed a gun at a Navy SEAL." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Around the room, conversations stopped. Even some of the children looked up, sensing that something important had just happened. Cray stared at her, trying to process what she had said. "You're lying." "Test me," Sarah said quietly. And in that moment, everything changed. The silence in the room stretched for exactly 3 seconds. Then Thomas Cray laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the wooden walls. "A Navy SEAL? You?" He looked at Sarah, still zip-tied and kneeling on the floor. "Lady, the SEALs don't take soccer moms." "They didn't," Sarah said quietly. "They took Sarah Chen, Petty Officer First Class, Class 327. I was in the second group of women to complete Bud S training." Something in her voice made Cray pause. Sarah's entire demeanor had changed. The desperate mother act was gone, replaced by something cold and professional. "You're telling me the Navy trained you to do what? Sneak around summer camps?" "They trained me to eliminate threats to American lives," Sarah replied, her eyes never leaving his. "Threats exactly like you." Murphy shifted nervously, his shotgun still trained on Sarah. "Cray, maybe we should just—" "Shut up," Cray snapped. He leaned down closer to Sarah, the barrel of his pistol inches from her forehead. "I don't care if you're Wonder Woman, you're tied up, surrounded, and outnumbered 12-1. So why don't you tell me what your real plan is?" Sarah's eyes flicked around the room, cataloging positions and distances. Most of the children were sitting in a group near the far wall, with 2 armed guards watching them. 3 more terrorists were positioned near windows, supposedly watching for outside threats, but actually watching the children. Murphy was beside her with the shotgun, and another man with an AR-15 stood near the main entrance. "My plan," Sarah said calmly, "was to get inside and assess the situation." And? Assessment complete. Before anyone could react, Sarah moved. 5 years of suburban life hadn't dulled her muscle memory. She swept her legs in a perfect arc, catching Cray behind the ankles and sending him crashing backward. As he fell, his pistol discharged into the ceiling, sending splinters of wood raining down. Sarah rolled sideways as Murphy tried to swing his shotgun toward her. The zip ties around her wrists were standard police issue. She had learned to escape from them during resistance training a decade ago. A sharp twist and upward jerk, and her hands were free. Murphy's shotgun boomed, but Sarah was already moving. She grabbed Cray's fallen pistol and put 2 round center mass into Murphy before he could chamber another shell. "Everybody down!" Sarah shouted to the children, who were already dropping to the floor as their counselors pulled them into cover behind overturned tables. The terrorist by the main entrance was raising his rifle when Sarah's next shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. She rolled behind a heavy wooden bench as return fire erupted from the other guards. "Emma!" Sarah called out. "Stay down, sweetheart, don't move!" Through her peripheral vision, she could see her daughter pressed flat against the floor near the fireplace, her counselor shielding her with his own body. Sarah's combat training kicked into full gear. She wasn't thinking about being a mother anymore. She was operating on pure tactical instinct. Every movement was calculated, every shot deliberate. The terrorist near the windows was firing an AR-15 in her direction, but he was shooting panicked bursts instead of aimed shots. Sarah waited for him to pause to reload, then moved to a new position behind an overturned table. "Control, this is Ghost," she whispered into her retrieved earpiece. "I'm inside the main building. Hostiles are neutralized or suppressed. Need immediate backup." "Ghost, what's your status?" 3 hostiles down, multiple still active. Hostages are in cover but not secure." Another burst of automatic fire ripped through the table she was hiding behind. Sarah counted muzzle flashes. At least 4 more shooters were still active inside the building. She heard Cray's voice from across the room shouting into a radio. "All units, converge on the main building. We have a federal agent inside." That was exactly what Sarah didn't want. If the other terrorists outside abandoned their positions and rushed the building, the children would be caught in a massive crossfire. "Control, advise all units that hostiles are calling for reinforcement. Do not let them reach the main building." "Copy, Ghost. Local law enforcement is moving to intercept." Sarah checked her ammunition. She had Cray's pistol with 8 rounds remaining, plus Murphy's dropped shotgun if she could reach it. Against at least 4 armed terrorists in a room full of children, those weren't great odds. But then she remembered something her instructor had told her during SEAL training. The mission isn't about having perfect odds. It's about making the odds irrelevant. Sarah studied the room's layout. The main entrance was blocked by the wounded terrorist, who was still conscious but not fighting. The windows along the south wall were covered but not secured. She could use them as exit routes if needed. Most importantly, the children were clustered in the northeast corner, which gave her a clear field of fire without putting them at risk. "This is your last warning," Cray shouted from his position behind the camp director's desk. "Surrender now, or we start shooting hostages." "Wrong answer," Sarah muttered. She grabbed a wooden chair and hurled it at the nearest window. The glass exploded outward, creating a distraction as she moved to a new position. 2 terrorists immediately started firing at the broken window, thinking she was trying to escape. Instead, Sarah flanked them from the inside. The first shooter was a young man, maybe Jake's age, who had positioned himself behind a bookshelf. He was so focused on the window that he never saw Sarah coming. She struck him across the back of the neck with the pistol butt, and he dropped unconscious. The second terrorist heard his partner fall and spun toward her, but Sarah was already moving. She grabbed his rifle barrel and drove her elbow into his solar plexus, then twisted the weapon out of his hands as he doubled over, gasping. 2 more down, she whispered into her earpiece. But her movement had exposed her position to Cray and the remaining terrorists. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, forcing her to dive for cover behind a heavy wooden cabinet. "You think you're some kind of superhero?" Cray yelled. "I've got 40 more people outside. You can't win this." Sarah smiled grimly. "I don't need to win. I just need to keep you busy for 12 more minutes." "What happens in 12 minutes?" "The FBI hostage rescue team arrives." It was a lie, but Sarah could see the uncertainty in Cray's eyes. He had counted on having hours to negotiate or execute his plan. The idea that professional help was only minutes away was clearly rattling him. "Control? Actual status on FBI backup?" she whispered. "Still 90 minutes out, Ghost, but State Police Tactical Team is en route. ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes was better than 90, but it was still too long. Sarah could hear more terrorists outside the building, shouting to each other as they tried to coordinate an assault on the main entrance. "Emma," she called out softly. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" "I'm scared, Mom," came the small voice from behind the overturned tables. "I know, baby. Just keep your head down. This will be over soon." Sarah meant it. One way or another, she was going to end this situation before any more children got hurt. She took inventory of her remaining resources: Cray's pistol with 6 rounds, an AR-15 she had taken from one of the downed terrorists, and her own tactical knowledge. Against at least 2 remaining hostiles inside the building and an unknown number outside. But she also had something the terrorists didn't expect: absolute certainty about what she was fighting for. Sarah checked her watch. She had been inside the building for 8 minutes. In her SEAL training, 8 minutes was considered a lifetime in a close-quarters battle. The fact that most of the children were still unharmed meant the terrorists had been trying to avoid casualties. That was about to change. She could hear footsteps outside. Multiple people moving around the building's perimeter. Through a gap in the covered windows, she saw muzzle flashes as the outside terrorists engaged with law enforcement positions. "Control, how many hostiles are we dealing with total?" "Best estimate 14 to 16 individuals. Local law enforcement has engaged multiple targets on the camp perimeter." Sarah nodded. If law enforcement was keeping the outside terrorists busy, she only had to worry about Cray and whoever else was still active inside the main building. She heard a new sound that made her blood run cold. One of the children was crying loudly, and an adult voice was trying to comfort them. "Please," a woman's voice called out. "Please don't hurt the children. They're just babies." "Tell your friend to surrender," Cray shouted back. "Tell her to drop her weapons and come out with her hands up." "Mom?" Emma's voice was small and frightened. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, her expression was pure steel. "Mr. Cray," she called out. "Let's make a deal. I'm listening. You let all the children go, right now. Walk them out the front door, and I'll surrender myself to you." Cray laughed. "Nice try. Those kids are the only reason you haven't already called in an airstrike on this place." "You're right," Sarah said. "They are. Which is why I'm going to do whatever it takes to get them to safety." "Whatever it takes? What does that mean?" Sarah stood up from behind her cover, her captured AR-15 held ready, but not aimed directly at Cray. "It means I'm done playing defense." She moved across the room in a tactical advance, using furniture and structural supports for cover. Cray and his remaining men opened fire, but Sarah was moving faster than they could track. She reached the group of children and positioned herself between them and the terrorists. "Everyone listen to me," she said loudly enough for her voice to carry across the room. "I'm going to count to 10. During that count, every child in this room is going to crawl to the front door and go outside. Adults will help them." "You're crazy," Cray yelled. "I'll shoot every one of them." "No, you won't," Sarah replied calmly. "Because if you hurt a single child, I will kill every person in this room who's carrying a weapon. And unlike you, I have the training to do exactly that." She began counting. 1. The camp counselors immediately understood what she was doing and started guiding children toward the front entrance. 2. More children began moving, crawling on their hands and knees as instructed. "Stop right there!" Cray screamed, but Sarah could hear the panic in his voice. 3. Emma looked up at her mother with wide, scared eyes. "Go, sweetheart," Sarah said softly. I'll be right behind you. 4. Half the children were now moving toward the exit. The counselors were creating a human shield around them, willing to put their own lives at risk. 5. Cray aimed his rifle at the group of moving children. I mean it. I'll shoot. Sarah immediately swung her weapon toward him. And I'll put a bullet through your head before you can pull that trigger. 6. More children were reaching the front door. Sarah could see sunlight streaming in as someone opened it from outside. 7. This is insane, one of Cray's remaining men shouted. Let them go. They're just kids. Shut up, Cray snarled. 8. Almost all the children were now near the exit. Emma was among the last group, still looking back at her mother. 9. Sarah saw Cray's finger tighten on his trigger. She was too far away to stop him if he decided to shoot. But then one of his own men stepped between Cray and the children. No, the terrorist said quietly. I signed up to fight the government, not murder kids. 10. The last child disappeared through the front door into safety. Sarah was alone in the room with Thomas Cray and 3 of his men. The odds were 4-1, but for the first time since entering the building, Sarah smiled. Now it's just us, she said. What happened next lasted less than 30 seconds, but it demonstrated exactly why the Navy SEALs had trained Sarah for situations exactly like this one. She moved with precision and speed that her opponents couldn't match. The first terrorist went down to a controlled pair of shots to the chest. The second managed to get off one wild shot before Sarah's return fire dropped him. The third terrorist, the one who had protected the children, threw down his weapon and raised his hands. I surrender. That left Thomas Cray, alone and facing a Navy SEAL who was no longer pretending to be anything other than exactly what she was. It's over, Cray, Sarah said, her rifle trained on his center mass. Cray looked around the room at his fallen men, then at Sarah. For a moment, the fanatic gleam in his eyes flickered with something that might have been sanity. You know what the funny thing is? He said quietly. What? I believe you. I believe you really are a Navy SEAL. Smart man. Cray dropped his weapon and raised his hands. I surrender. Sarah kept her rifle trained on him as she spoke into her earpiece. Control. This is Ghost. Main building is secure. All hostiles neutralized or in custody. All hostages are safe. Copy, Ghost. Outstanding work. State Police Tactical Team is on site and moving to your position. Through the broken windows, Sarah could hear the sounds of the remaining terrorists outside surrendering to law enforcement. It was over. She walked to the front door and stepped outside into the afternoon sunlight. Emma was waiting for her, surrounded by other children and camp counselors, all of them safe and unharmed. Mom! Emma ran toward her, and Sarah caught her daughter in a fierce hug. It's okay, sweetheart. Everything's okay now. As she held Emma, Sarah looked around at the other children. They were scared and confused, but they were alive. Every single one of them was going home to their families. Are you really a Navy SEAL? Emma asked, looking up at her mother with new eyes. Sarah smiled. I used to be. Now I'm just your mom. That's pretty cool, though. Yeah, Sarah said, looking around at the rescued children. I guess it is. Later that evening, after giving statements to federal investigators and making sure Emma was okay, Sarah sat on their back porch watching the sunset over the mountains. David had rushed home from work as soon as he heard about the incident, and he was inside making hot chocolate for Emma. Agent Collins appeared at their back gate. Mind if I join you? Sarah nodded toward the empty chair beside her. How's the cleanup going? All the terrorists are in custody. The ones who survived, anyway. Collins sat down and looked out at the mountains. You know, we did a background check on you before this morning. Your military record is impressive. It's history. Is it? Because what you did today was exactly the kind of thing that made you valuable to the Navy. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I retired for a reason. I know, but situations like today, they're going to keep happening. Domestic terrorism is on the rise. We need people with your skills. You need people who don't have 8-year-old daughters to worry about. Collins nodded. Fair enough, but if you ever change your mind... He left a business card on the porch railing and walked away. Sarah picked up the card and studied it for a moment. Then she tore it in half and let the pieces scatter in the wind. Emma came outside carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. Dad said you saved everyone today. We all saved each other, sweetheart. Will the bad men come back? Sarah put her arm around her daughter. No, they won't be bothering anyone for a very long time. Good. Emma leaned against her mother's side. Mom? Yeah? Next time you drop me off at camp, maybe just tell them you used to be a Navy SEAL. It might save time. Sarah laughed, the first real laugh she'd had all day. I'll keep that in mind. As the stars came out over Pine Ridge, Sarah Martinez realized something important. She might have left the Navy, but the Navy had never really left her. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing after all. The woman who had pointed guns at terrorists and rescued dozens of children was the same woman who made pancakes on Sunday mornings and helped with homework every night. She wasn't 2 different people. She was one person who had learned to be exactly who she needed to be when the moment demanded it. And sometimes, the moment demanded everything she had ever been trained to do.